So Kim Belair had a segment at XOXO, an experimental festival in Portland, Oregon for independent artists and creators who work online. I wanted to go through it real quick and give a brief analysis. Ultimately, what this will all amount to for me is damage control, and I'll elaborate a bit more about that at the end of this video.
I'm Kim Belair. In my circles, I'm largely considered, I think, a relatively nice person.
First observation is that Kim sounds tired, and I'm just comparing her voice here to her delivery at GDC.
I'm a narrative designer, I'm extremely nervous, and I'm the co-founder of a little narrative development company called Sweet Baby Inc.
At GDC, she sounded far more upbeat, but here there's a noticeable weariness.
These are my dogs, Sage and Flaky. These are my cats, Tag and the Gray Boy. I really enjoy Lego. I collect skulls and taxidermy, and I also really like playing a lot of video games, including Elden Ring. By day, I am the crazed CEO of Sweet Baby Inc.
Observation number 2. This footage for the entire presentation has been edited, which leaves me to wonder what was left out.
This is like a sanitization of her first talk. Or like a, give me a do-over! I said it wrong. I made it sound really bad. Let me say the same thing again, but better.
The DEI-obsessed censorship mafia who is currently ruining and wokeifying all of the video games that you've ever played.
Observation number 3. Kim is using hyperbole to make her critics sound crazy. And I know this is cliche, but much of what she says here is projection.
Thank you. Thank you, it's hard work.
Observation number 4, and this is more speculation, this applause does not sound organic at all.
If you haven't heard of Sweet Baby Inc., thank you. That's actually how I prefer it.
Okay, she says this, but then why is she on stage talking about it to a public audience? And why is she posting things on social media constantly? Why did someone in her company openly harass a Steam curator group via Twitter?
But if you have, it's either because of the over 80 amazing and often award-winning games that we've worked on.
Kim uses the phrase worked on, even though Sweet Baby Inc. is a consultation group and they allegedly are only there for consultation and not development.
You've either heard us from all of these wonderful games, or perhaps you're familiar with the nearly year-long hate campaign that has been waged against us as a team.
Nobody organized a campaign against Sweet Baby Inc. The only reason any of this came to light was because some rando created a Steam curator group, and then one of Sweet Baby's employees, Chris Kindred, made a stink about it on Twitter. So this whole campaign, if you really want to call it that, was started by an algorithm train that owes everything to what was started on Twitter. So once again, if Kim or Sweet Baby prefer not to be in the limelight, then they should have kept to themselves. Ultimately, all of this is an attempt to sweep and rewrite history.
Unfortunately, today I'm here to talk about that in a talk I'm going to call What Happens When You Get Harassed? A Sweet Baby Story. So I'm going to start at the beginning. Who is Sweet Baby Inc.? We are a narrative development company, and we are a team of narrative developers. What that means is that we do script writing, storytelling, narrative work for video games, and sometimes that means that we come in for writing punch-ups. Sometimes that means we're the entire writer's room for a project. Sometimes that means we're coming in very, very early on and helping them start the groundwork, the world building. But what I want to really stress is that all of our work focuses very heavily and very seriously on story. That is what narrative development is.
First, they were a consultation company, and now they're just full-on story developers. But remember, you had journals like Kotaku who were saying this wasn't the case. Sweet Baby are just adding extra touches to stories or narratives. The idea was that they were more or less a third party looking in at someone else's story and just giving them advice here and there. Well, now we can take this as confirmation that they do far more than that. Straight from the mouth of a horse. That is to say, straight from the horse's mouth.
We started out in 2018, but it was really in 2020 that we kind of came to any kind of industry prominence. And it was on a backdrop of the COVID quarantine sending everybody home from the office. Me Too sweeping through the games industry as various bad actors were named and shamed, appropriately, I should say. And also the Black Lives Matter protests were in full swing. At the time, the industry was kind of responding in the way you might imagine, with a lot of corporate overpromising, but within the writing sphere, there were a lot of offers for portfolio reviews. Like, hey, if you're a marginalized or especially a black dev, we would love to give you a portfolio review. The problem with portfolio reviews is that they also assume that it's a meritocracy, right? They assume the problem is your portfolio and not the fact that maybe there's a lot of other reasons that you are not getting the gig. So knowing that there were a myriad problems to be solved, we created an email called talk@sweetbabyinc, and we just said, hey, if you're a developer who wants to get into the industry, if you're someone who's already in the industry and you want to talk, just talk to us. And so in that year, we ended up with a lot of people who we connected to, and we talked a lot about advocacy, we talked a lot about helping people get into the industry, and we also talked a lot about the importance of telling stories from a variety of perspectives, and especially of having those writers and those creators in the room to help you with that.
So this might be the most important takeaway from everything Kim says here, because this involves far more than just Sweet Baby Inc. This is the most mask-off, self-reporting segment of her talk here. In 2020, everyone goes into quarantine.
How long it lasts, we don't know. The mayor here in LA says a month. He thinks could be 2.
And meanwhile, quite a few draconian laws go into place all over the country, all over the world, in fact. And then as the year goes on, we get these George riots. And the obvious reaction is, what's going on here? Weren't we told to mask up and social distance? But we have these riots going on, people out in the street, no social distancing, no masks.
Dr. Fauci, do protests increase the spread of the virus?
Do protests increase the spread of the virus? I think I can make a general statement.
Well, 500,000 protesters on June 6th alone.
Yeah.
I'm just asking, that number of
No.
people, does it increase the spread of the virus?
Crowding together, particularly when you're not wearing a mask, contributes to the spread of the virus.
Should we limit the protesting?
I'm not sure what you mean. How do we say limit the protesting?
Should government limit the protesting?
I don't think that's relevant to.
But no, you can't even talk about that. You can't say anything because you're amidst a sea of apology touring.
Hashtag apology lunch. Go find yourself a black person and buy them some food. Hashtag apology lunch.
I take responsibility.
I take responsibility.
I take responsibility.
So I invite folks to put some words to action here. And if we need to find somebody that needs to have their shoe shine, we need to just go right on over and shine their shoes.
And some stock in Chick-fil-A.
Various companies are saying just how sorry they are for being involved in the killing of St. Floyd, and how they'll do better, and their companies will finally stop being bigots or whatever.
And it was on a backdrop of the COVID quarantine sending everybody home from the office. Me Too sweeping through the games industry as various bad actors were named and shamed, appropriately, I should say. And also the Black Lives Matter protests were in full swing.
And these companies start playing musical chairs with their leadership, with their management, allowing anyone with just a hint of melanin to take the wheel because they're afraid that if they don't,
Everything is sexist, everything is racist, everything is homophobic, and you have to point it all out.
So now it's almost 5 years later, and the people who were put into power are telling us straight up how they got into power. And it wasn't by merit of anything they did or had done.
Within the writing sphere, there were a lot of offers for portfolio reviews. Like, hey, if you're a marginalized or especially a black dev, we would love to give you a portfolio review.
So here's the analogy. Imagine society is a cruise ship. Suddenly there's a disease that breaks out and most of the crew, including the captain, gets sick. There's still people walking out and about, and then suddenly, oops, a black person fell overboard because somebody pushed him, allegedly. So now the ship is going adrift. Nobody is at the helm until a bunch of diversity people show up at the bridge and say, hey, we're taking command now. And if you don't let us, it means you're racist and that you were responsible for that dude being pushed overboard. And so the captain relents, and then years later the ship is completely off course and everyone on board is asking, what the hell is going on? Well, that's more or less where we are now.
The problem with portfolio reviews is that they also assume that it's a meritocracy, right? They assume the problem is your portfolio and not the fact that maybe there's a lot of other reasons that you are not getting the gig. So,
but what other reasons would those be, Kim? No, she doesn't answer, but based on how she feels about straight white men, we can take an educated guess.
As like a woman of color, I have played with and like empathized with a lot of white men. I have played as Kratos, who's like literally white. I've played as Nathan Drake. I've played as Arthur Morgan. And I've loved it. And I don't think it's like pie in the sky thinking to go like, hey, maybe we can invite white dudes to play as other people and experience different things through someone else's eyes.
As we joined new conversations, as we worked on more projects, more people joined our team. And so in that year, or in those subsequent years, we grew from a team of only 5 to a team of 16 incredibly talented people.
And here I wish I could lend the time and effort to investigate the histories of these 16 people, but I can guarantee they are not as diverse as they might seem. In other words, the through line is usually going to be that they all subscribe to the same or to a similar ideological framework, and the only diverse part about them has everything to do with what they look like physically and what they enjoy doing with their gonads.
Throughout the years, again, we worked on, as I said, a ton of games. For most of these, we did writing, story development. Sometimes we just kind of came on and did spot checks. But the thing that genuinely made me really, really proud of all of us was that we were living up to the title that I had wanted to. We were becoming true narrative developers, capable of taking on pretty much any task as far as it touched story on any project at any time. And that expertise was a result of all the different kinds of work that we were doing. For those not in the industry or not familiar with it, most game writers in their entire careers will see 5 to 10 projects as just, a lifetime. And we would see that many projects in a matter of months. And what happens when you work on that many projects and you get to see the inside of so many processes is that you don't learn necessarily like, oh, here are the ins and outs of working in this specific company. You instead hyper-focus on narrative and all of its parts, and you get really good at it. You get really, really specific at it, and you become craftspeople.
Except Sweet Baby isn't crafting anything. All of this is presumptive language. Again, this woman thinks that having 2 black people talking to each other in a room together is just somehow innovative storytelling. And this leaves one to question where the growth even begins, much less how one tracks skill development. Even there, consider the language Kim is using here as her team learns more and more about narrative development.
We were becoming true narrative developers, capable of taking on pretty much any task as far as it touched story on any project at any time, and that expertise was a result of all the different kinds of work that we were doing.
That in and of itself betrays her finding worth in merit, even though she thinks being marginalized trumps meritocracy.
Hey, if you're a marginalized or especially a black dev, we would love to give you a portfolio review. The problem with portfolio reviews is that they also assume that it's a meritocracy, right? They assume the problem is your portfolio and not the fact that maybe there's a lot of other reasons that you are not getting the gig. So,
isn't it already enough that her team is diverse, right? Then why would they need to grow from their experiences and become good at something?
That expertise was a result of all the different kinds of work that we were doing. Hey, if you're a marginalized or especially a black dev, we would love to give you a portfolio review. That expertise was a result of all the different kinds of work that we were doing. That expertise, hey, if you're a marginalized or especially a black dev, expertise.
So just to drive the point home, Kim Belair and her team cheated the system and allotted themselves powers through diversity. And now that they're in, they can now stop pretending like diversity means anything and adopt the language of meritocracy.
And funnily enough, as far as this company is concerned, that was actually my end game. I wanted us to become craftspeople because when I was a kid, I learned a lot about Carrie Fisher. And beyond her acting career, she was actually a very respected script doctor in Hollywood. And I remember finding that so fascinating and really, really striking because, quite famously, she was someone who struggled a lot with the eye of fame, but it was so comforting and interesting to hear that in this community of artists and writers, she was deeply respected just for her craft.
So Kim aspires to be like famous Hollywood actress Carrie Fisher. Kim has also appeared on stage here at XOXO and took a podium at GDC. She also talks a lot about her personal life.
I wrote about myself a lot. And I would put myself into a lot of art, into a lot of narratives, and I put my family and people who look like me in all of these cool scenarios. And I was telling all these stories where I got to see myself, I got to see people who look like me, and kind of a rainbow of people who were kind of adjacent to me in a lot of ways. And I think it was really neat, and I was really fostered in that.
I really enjoy Lego. I collect skulls and taxidermy.
And she's also appeared on multiple occasions doing interviews online. Yet after saying all this, she then says she doesn't want to be known publicly?
I've never wanted to be known by audiences, really. I have never wanted to be known by gamers, certainly. And
We want privacy! We want privacy!
rather than, any praise or people going, wow, how did you do it? Or just, hey, a narrative development company, what does that mean? I'm really interested. We were instead found by kind of, 4chan and the worst people on Twitter.
This whole segment is completely inconsequential because Kim is pitting her company against Anonymous, just a bunch of randos online who have any number of opinions. The way this entire presentation works is she sets Sweet Baby Inc. up as if they're the victims of what she deems a campaign. But a campaign is organized. Campaigns have leadership behind them, in addition to foot soldiers adhering to some cause. But there's nothing about the disposition shown toward Sweet Baby Inc. that can even conceivably constitute a campaign. At best, a lot of folks are just chasing the algorithm for grift. But how many people really know or acknowledge any stake in what comes next? So Kim can say whatever the hell she wants here, but the strawman she is arguing against constitutes nothing more than passing nomads. People without any discernible identities of their own and are using whatever platforms they have to voice their displeasure for a company that, in its own words, is forcing diversity into various narratives.
At the core of my approach here, and the approach that we take as a company, I genuinely believe that representation is not censorship, it is innovation. Diversity in narrative makes things more intense. It can make it more visceral and more real. It doesn't have to always make something more wholesome or softer. I really do believe that by opening up to new perspectives, by getting folks in the room, we actually push more boundaries and we get more real.
Straight from the mouth of a horse. Or what I meant to say was from the horse's mouth.
Suddenly, we were being told that we were, funded by BlackRock and that actually we weren't a narrative development company. We were a DEI company, some kind of vaguely defined censor, and that we were here to use all of the power we had amassed to force companies to go woke.
First of all, Kim doesn't even mention Vanguard here, which is another multinational investment company like BlackRock. With that aside, she says BlackRock doesn't fund Sweet Baby Inc., but that's an answer to a question nobody asked. The thing about BlackRock is that they're known for investing in companies that score high on ESG, and that's why companies adopt DEI practices and why they might hire Sweet Baby Inc. in the first place. It's all to get funding from these investment firms. So no, BlackRock probably doesn't directly fund Sweet Baby Inc., but companies that hire Sweet Baby are likely doing so in order to dip into that BlackRock money.
But literally within a few hours of me seeing that first post, we were not only being accused of, forcing a black person into Alan Wake, which one is cool, but we didn't do, and also of putting pride flags into Spider-Man's New York, which, again, so good, love to see them, but we were not responsible for them. But
the thing about denying involvement in these specific parts of narrative development is that one questions what parts of the narrative development Sweet Baby were involved in and why Kim isn't talking about that.
We were very excited. In retrospect, we were actually comically excited because we had a couple thousand followers at the time, mostly game devs, and we were like, okay, it's time to stand up and be proud of our work. Wow, this is gonna be really nice. And I remember even thinking that morning as we made these posts, I wonder if anyone's gonna notice that we posted about Spider-Man, we're also posting about Alan Wake. Will anyone put it together? Because I think our way of working at Sweet Baby, the kind of teamwork that we do on so many different games, is really, really unique. I think it's really cool. I think people will be excited about it and about our craft. So I decided to do a cheeky Google and see hey, had anyone put that together? The Google went bad. I shouldn't have done it.
So a friend of mine mentioned to me how amusing it is to watch Kim create a narrative, even as she talks about creating narratives. The way she posits things here, she was just playfully going on to Google one day, and then, oh dear, she was assaulted by a barrage of criticism. Poor thing. But let me remind you, Sweet Baby Inc. outed themselves on Twitter by picking a fight with people consuming the products that they were involved in. If that Twitter fire had never happened, Kim wouldn't even be on stage here.
And looking back, there is a funny element to it where I go people were kind of talking I've discovered a secret Canadian company. These are the guys who did it. And the discovery that they had made was actually our public-facing website that we advertise our services on, and which you can go to right now if you'd like to collaborate with us or just learn more. It's not hidden.
Nobody said it was hidden. People didn't know about it and then they were made aware of it. Not being aware of something doesn't mean it is hiding from you when you discover it.
But literally within a few hours of me seeing that first post, we were not only being accused of, forcing a black person into Alan Wake, which one is cool, but we didn't do.
So for reference, the character Saga Anderson from Alan Wake 2 was a white woman. And then sometime after Remedy Entertainment brought in Sweet Baby and Kim Belair, Saga Anderson was race swapped. So just to be clear on this, Kim wants us to believe it was all purely coincidental.
Suddenly, the conspiracy was just alive.
So this is more selective wordplay. See, in cases like this, there's no centralized conspiracy. As another friend of mine put it, it's the form of a cathedral. What you have are people who create incentives for other people. As I mentioned earlier, companies like BlackRock will give money to other companies who are compliant with DEI or ESG.
At BlackRock, we are forcing behaviors. 54% of the incoming class are women. We added 4 more points in terms of diverse employment this year. And what we are doing internally is if you don't achieve these levels of impact, your compensation could be impacted, okay? And if you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race or just any way you want to say the composition of your team, you're going to be impacted. And that's not recruiting, it is development, as Ken said.
And what does the D in DEI stand for? Diversity. The S in ESG, social. All of this is relevant to human resource divisions, recruiters, and direct colleagues in various companies who want to bring in consultants to make changes. Companies want to be paid, and they know that their money will be in jeopardy if their company is labeled as racist, bigoted, or whatever other isms there might be. So Sweet Baby strikes the fear of God into them.
Do not wait until the end to call your consultants. Bring them in at the beginning, and instead of asking them, hey, is this very racist thing we did very racist? Or is this deeply offensive thing we did deeply offensive? Are you hurt by it?
Everything is sexist, everything is racist, everything is homophobic, and you have to point it all out.
Put this stuff up to your higher-ups, and if they don't see the value in what you're asking for when you ask for consultants, when you ask for research, go have a coffee with your marketing team and just terrify them with the possibility of what's going to happen if they don't give you what you want.
This is how they make their money. It's a scam. Just make a company worried about being labeled as one of the isms by the media, by the news, if these companies don't implement your, quote, narrative changes.
They were finding photos of us, sometimes our families or our contractors. They were doxing me and other members of the team. Anyone calling these attacks out as doxing was accused of doxing themselves or lashing out. That's me. I'm the CEO. I have issues. But yeah, this went on for weeks and then months. At its peak, which was somewhere around like February, March of this year, we were getting something like 300 emails a day, which admittedly some of those are going to be spam or bots or whatever it is, but they were often accompanied by death threats, threats to our family. We did have one bomb threat made to the police that they contacted us about. And
Anita Sarkeesian used to do this exact same thing. Just anecdote a bunch of death threats. Never show the reports, not even ones that have been properly redacted for sensitive personal information. No proof. Just tell your story, narrative designer. Come to think of it, this reminds me of a particular instance where Josh Moon, admin of the Kiwi Farms, was talking about how author Patrick Tomlinson would go on public television and talk at great length about being swatted. And the advice given by Josh was simply to say, don't go public talking about this stuff because all it really does is encourage further hits. And the reasoning behind this is that death threats do not necessarily have to be fake, and if they are real, those who make them and actually try to follow up on them are crazy people anyway. But the incentive for Kim, or Anita, or whomever it is mentioning death threats is to throw a wide net over criticism and lead you to assume that there's just a ton of crazies out there. Very disingenuous. But the reality is, if these crazy people know that their actions have an effect, that will only lead them to repeatedly offend for the sake of attention. And that's partially why I don't trust anything Kim says here, because by even mentioning death threats, she would only be encouraging further harassment on herself and her fellow employees. But then again, maybe that is the goal, and I suspect it is.
At the You know, at best, the nicest thing you would see in some of these spaces was that we were a punchline. But any defenders were really, really shouted down quite quickly. And in moments when this movement couldn't dig up like another reason to attack us, they would just kind of move on to other groups who they perceived to be like us. All while, you know, doing the work of erasing all of those people's and our actual jobs and interest and papering over it with kind of, you know, that rallying cry of far-right supremacy, DEI.
So you heard that right. DEI is apparently a far-right supremacy rally call now.
So this was hard the whole time. Like, not since the beginning, it wasn't great. But, you know, we were receiving countless emails, all this constant hate. It was targeted enough to feel disconcerting, even when it was kind of silly. And it was also kind of drowning out the support. But when Elon chimed in, it really made me realize the scale of it, because the richest man in the world was suddenly turning like the Eye of Sauron onto 16 people trying to make a pretty modest living in the industry that they love, and he was arguing for our collapse.
And there we have it. Projection. This is exactly what Sweet Baby Inc. did to that Brazilian guy who started the Steam Curator group. They're just accusing their opponents of what they themselves do.
And this meant that, you know, it was when this happened and when it got bigger than this, you can tell I got it early as a screenshot, but yeah, it made us realize that this was huge. We were being attacked in a massive and coordinated campaign of harassment, and that sucks. More specifically, what happened during all of this, if I can kind of dig down into this review, is, you know, we lost our voice. And we didn't just lose our voice as a collective, we lost our voices individually, because people on our team were either hounded off of social media or, you know, they get attacked so consistently that it just becomes frustrating to use. It's not enjoyable to hop on anywhere and get that wave of hate. So we weren't allowed. We are no longer allowed to be in the conversation without, you know, what amounts to mass targeting.
This is a role reversal of the whole cancel culture phenomena. A culture that was built up by the SJW and woke crowds of the past decade or so is now doubling back on them. So now they're on the other end of the spectrum, supposedly. But I don't believe for a second that Kim has done any soul searching as a result of this, because this entire review, as she calls it, is just her doubling down.
What happens when you get harassed is that you realize that most of it is just noise and that nothing functionally or fundamentally changes.
See, when I look at her on stage like this in front of who knows how many people, someone who has been involved in the industry and, you know, stuck her fingers in several pies along the way, she still, even now, still posits things like she is the victim.
You can monetize a hate video, but there is no hazard pay for harassment. And we are not, you know, despite what you may have heard, so moneyed that we can just take a break or take a vacation and chill.
Anyway, the rest of this video isn't worth covering. The long and short of everything is that Sweet Baby and Kim are just going to play through. They haven't learned anything from this except to double down. Now, there's a phenomenon on the internet that has been around for a while now. It isn't exactly relegated to the internet, although the digital world makes it far easier to use. The words to describe it change every so often, but every now and then you'll see a word called sweeping show up. What sweeping means is that something bad has happened, it's bad for PR, bad for optics, so anyone affected by the dirty laundry will immediately try to sweep. You know, hide it under the rug and immediately gaslight. This didn't happen. You're not remembering that correctly. That happened a long time ago, etc., etc. Well, it just so happens that even as I was making this video, I got news that Chris Kindred had been fired from Sweet Baby Inc. Now, why that is relevant, of course, is because Chris Kindred was the one originally responsible for the whole Twitter storm that spiraled into putting Sweet Baby into the limelight. Now, this is incredibly ironic given Kim wants to pivot this whole drama as somehow spontaneously originating from a social media hate campaign. And what it also means is that there's problems amidst her little diversity team that she curated. What this all tells me is that Sweet Baby is and has been stuck in damage control for quite some time now, and I predict that it is only going to get worse from here on out. Because the mask is off now. And while many might not have the words to express it, most everyone pretty much knows that the jig is up. One final part which I added after I finished watching Harmful Opinions' video on this. Tim made some great points about just how unprofessional Kim's entire presentation was.
My friends like me. People I know like me. Look at my dogs. Bro, this is pathetic. This is like from a, I don't know, like an Adam Sandler movie or something, where they have the tacky PR coach saying, "We have to humanize you, show that you have dogs, you like Lego, you play the popular game Elden Ring."
She used this presentation as a means of plugging her website for one, and then the rest of what she said was all stuff you would probably hear someone saying to their therapist in a private office. In other words, not in a public venue.
We were very excited. In retrospect, we were actually like comically excited because we had a couple thousand followers at the time, mostly game devs, and we were like, okay, it's time to stand up and be proud of our work. Wow, this is gonna be really nice. So I decided to do a cheeky Google and see like, hey, can anyone put that together? The Google went bad. I shouldn't have done it.
So this is all just embarrassing. Adults just don't do this, or they shouldn't. You don't air your grievances with your customers like this because all it does is divide them even further. Another great point that Tim made was Kim is on stage here giving a presentation and doesn't realize the irony of claiming that she or Sweet Baby have lost their voice.
You know, we lost our voice.
By the way, a benefit of the harassment is I get to do a talk here, but we lost our voice. I lost my voice, says woman speaking at festival.
And you couple that with the fact that she completely leaves out the instance of Chris Kindred starting the ball rolling in the first place. But as I mentioned earlier, they're sweeping that up. I dare say in the future, if this stuff is ever brought up again, they're gonna deny it, and then if pushed on it, they'll just say, oh, don't worry, we fired that guy. So, problem solved. But in reality, if other companies are paying attention, they know this is all a cope in the wake of a PR nightmare. But what if this happens again? What if one of these 15, formerly 16 employees at Sweet Baby starts acting a fool on social media or elsewhere? If there's a fallout after that, do you just do another presentation like this one where you blame, right-wing extremists for spontaneously coming out of the woodwork a second time with an entirely new, quote, campaign against your brand? In a just world, this entire presentation would lead to other companies realizing Sweet Baby Inc. as a brand is just toxic. Now, I suppose one could rebrand and get away with it. A lot of consumers have goldfish memories, and they probably wouldn't notice for a time, given how quickly news travels in one ear and out the other. But this all even assumes Sweet Baby is the cause and not the symptom. And that's the way Kim posits the entire argument. But that hasn't ever been the case. Wokeness is a disease. It has seeped its way into a lot of media, in institutions, and in culture. The fact that much of it is being exposed right now for its true nature is only the first step in a long road toward getting rid of it entirely. And I suspect that fight will continue for another decade or so until we see some real change. But you see, beyond reactionary content, do you know what's really going to be the stake in the heart that kills this vampire? This thing right here.
I think to protect myself and for my own mental health, I've made sure that I work with people I really, really care about and really, really respect and really, really enjoy working with. I often talk about the fact that like video games are such huge projects, right? And they feel like they're these huge works of creative brilliance and they take so many brains, but for me, I would much rather work on something that is an okay project with great people who I care about, who lift each other up, who provide like a sense of balance, than something that is, maybe technically very proficient, but it was hell to make and the people aren't empathetic.
See, all this talk about innovation and creative development, most artists will tell you that the best art they create is art that was made through adversity. The only things worthwhile are the things that are worth fighting for. But you see, what matters to Kim is just making art within the most comfortable environment ever. Zero adversity. So it won't be the anti-woke crowd that has its final say against these parasites. No. It'll be consumers in general who just won't even find their works compelling in the slightest. Sweet Baby Inc. won't vanish in shame. Instead, they will disappear in irrelevancy.